guys, it's Sean O'Connell, the managing editor at CinemaBlend and co-host of the ReelBlend podcast, with a very special episode that we're bringing you where we got to sit down with writer, director, and actor Dan Levy for his directorial debut, Good Grief. The best thing about Good Grief is that it started playing at the end of last year, but now it is going readily available for more people to go and check out. It did get a limited theatrical run, but now it's available for you to check out on the Netflix streaming service. And as you will find out over the course of our conversation, Dan took a lot of stuff that he learned while directing a few episodes of Schitt's Creek, but also just appearing on that show and figuring out the arc of the characters that changed a lot from the early days of Schitt's Creek to where they ended up to become so much more emotional and so much more relatable to people instead of these sort of broad sitcom caricatures. We learned to really care for those characters and love that family. And Dan brings a lot of that knowledge to the part that he plays in Good Grief. I don't think it's giving too much away to say that it's him dealing with his character dealing with a significant loss of a loved one, and how he moves forward in his year following, thanks to help that he gets from two of his closest friends. But it was really interesting to sit down with Dan and talk about his process, how he figured out how to write, how he included very specific locations from around Paris and London, and then the complications that came with almost including those locations in Paris and London, a lot of the things that he figured out as a first-time filmmaker. And then he gets into some really in-depth conversation about whether or not, if he directs again, whether he would be the lead in the film because of the challenges that come with that. So, we love Dan Levy. We think he's an extremely entertaining guy. Loved him in Schitt's Creek. And we're very excited to see what he was going to do as a director. After we saw Good Grief, we knew we had to get him on the show. We knew you guys would appreciate the conversation. So without further ado, this is Dan Levy joining us on the ReelBlend podcast to talk about his new film available right now on Netflix titled Good Grief.
I'm staying in a hotel. There's like these hotels now where it's like, God forbid a light actually be turned on.
I know.
Like there's mood lighting, and then there's like, can I actually find the bathroom?
Or like a table for my laptop. There's no more tables. They don't exist anymore.
Yeah, no. God forbid there be a table. No, you're sitting on the floor.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I'm Sean. That's Kevin. We're part of the ReelBlend podcast.
Hi, everybody.
And we're really happy to be able to talk about this film, especially now that it's coming to Netflix. And I know you've been doing a ton of press about it. We're going to try to find some angles that hopefully you haven't talked at length about.
No, listen, there was a writer's strike that almost like took this whole press tour out. So there is a huge amount of gratitude to be able to speak on about the movie.
Good. I wanted to just start here. It's really important for this movie to make Oliver as human of a character as possible. And you get a limited amount of time to do that. So I wanted you to just talk about the process of, in the limited time that you had, helping us to understand as much as we could about Oliver, knowing that he would cast a shadow over the rest of the story.
Of course. And I think the other thing too is like, how do you do that without really schlocky expositional dialogue about who these people are and what they mean to each other? So it really honestly came down to casting. And you needed someone who was so charming and magnetic and could really hold that space, for the brief amount of time that they were on camera, and embed themselves into people's heads and into people's hearts so that they are ever present through the rest of the movie. And that came in the form of Luke Evans. And he's like one of those people who's just a charmer, and he's such a huge personality, and he's like a huge guy. He's gigantic, and like so handsome and charismatic. It was wild to be in his presence, but he read the script and he really responded to it and wanted to be a part of it. And he just had that star quality to really exemplify the fact that like, this was a person who could easily sweep my character off their feet and give them a life that is filled with distraction and glamour and fun. And that was, so it came down to Luke, and he really kind of we shot with him, I want to say for maybe 4 days, 3 days.
Oh my gosh.
Christmas,
wow.
The Christmas party took, I think, 2 days to shoot. And he came in like it was like it ain't no thing, and just crushed day after day after day. And he's holding court in this party, just like, delivering lines and having to pour people's wine, fill up people's glasses and sing. And he's just a pro.
Leading a group sing along and having it be authentic is not easy.
Not easy at all. And that was the fear, right? Like, finding a group of background performers that weren't just going to kind of glance at the camera every time it passed by them. We rehearsed the song and we rehearsed the choir parts of it for a full day. And I think it was the camaraderie that was formed by all of us being there together, like our key cast and then all the party goers, that led to this. There was a comfort when we walked on set because we'd done it before and we got to know each other and meet each other. I was, cringy party scenes are really tough. And I just tried everything I could to try to, especially if it's the first, this is the beginning of the movie. So if you know what I mean? If it's like, if you strike out there, you're
sets the tone,
screwed for the rest of the film. But
for sure.
It was just, I knew when we were shooting it that it felt really lived in and at least that part of the movie was going to be really fun and engaging.
Dan, I've always been fascinated by like the choices that actors and filmmakers make for like the little details of characters, depending on the way the clothing, the shoes. And I remember this is not like to name drop at all, but I remember years ago I had a chance to interview Denzel Washington and we were talking about the little things about a character's. And he goes, when I put this character's shoes on, that's when I found who the character was. And I was like, that was such an interesting thing. And then, so I look at you in real life and you're very well known for the thick glasses that you wear. And I love those glasses. And the reason I bring that up is because Mark's glasses are very different from the glasses I generally see you wear. And I don't know you outside of interviews or press and things like that. But how important is a detail like that to a character? And how do you decide the glasses Mark's going to wear, because they're different from your own?
Well, you try them out. I mean, for me, the importance of costume started with Schitt's Creek, and clothing these characters again allows for you to not have to write a lot. Any opportunity that you could squeeze in the visual elements of the storytelling that can reveal character, that can reveal nuance about who people are and what they want and how they choose to present themselves in the world. And that goes for production design as well. It goes for the homes that they live in and the way that they choose to decorate and all of these things. They're so important because they're character exposition without having to write it. Part of it's laziness on my account, and part of it is just I have such a phobia of bad expositional dialogue. We've all gotten those scripts where it's like, okay, I need to say all of this about myself? Like, is there any acting that I can do, or is it just me talking about who I am? So costume in particular, I think, is such an opportunity to squeeze character for everything beyond the dialogue. And, Mark is far more, I think, just as a person, like more modest than I am. I think he's more of a wallflower. I think he's also more practical. And so those choices of what he would wear and the glasses that he would wear for me were more from a practical standpoint. They had style, because he's an artist. So he's always keeping in mind the aesthetic of things, but it's not, he doesn't want the look at me thing that I guess I do. Like, you know what I mean? I don't know.
It's interesting. It really is, because when you go shopping for glasses, that's what I was trying to get at. Like they're like it's almost like it's a quieter glasses. So you're 100% right. I was wondering.
It's a quieter person. I had to physically like train myself out of the habits that I had formed playing David Rose on Schitt's Creek. He was a completely. I mean, Mark in this movie is so still and so reserved and so avoidant, coming from 80 episodes of a television show where no reaction was too small. It was like, it was almost like I had to physically be aware of how little I had to do and how still I had to be in order to be this person, and how hard that was at times to kind of rid yourself of the habits that are formed of playing a character that is so elastic and so larger than life.
Real quick, I want to follow up on that because what you just said reminds me of the line in the film about muscle memory. Because there's that beautiful concept for people who haven't seen it, where you talk about this idea of when you lose somebody, your brain's not used to the concept of not wanting to love them in that moment. Yeah. And could you compare that at all to leaving Schitt's Creek and kind of like the muscle memory of that character and kind of like finding the muscle memory of a new character?
For sure, as an actor, yeah. I mean, it's a rare thing to be able to play a character for as long as I did and still be excited by them. And continue to add to them. And by the end, I mean, the character of David Rose, when we found him in the pilot episode, is so different than where we find him at the end. He's way more comfortable in his skin. But as a result, the performance got bigger and more reactive. And so, yeah, it's like it's in me. It's physically kind of programmed in me to do the wrong thing as an actor. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those rare occurrences where it's like, can we try that? But like really go bigger now. In drama, I'm acting opposite Ruth Negga and Himesh Patel. Like, I can't be doing what I've done around like wonderfully subtle, gorgeous film actors. It's a very different craft. So I think also being with them, when you're around unbelievable talent like those two, it only forces you to keep up, really, and to improve and to observe and to strive to kind of not embarrass yourself.
But Dan, I do want to ask about a specific scene though, where your editing and your use of reaction is so flawless, and that's when Caitlin's giving the eulogy at the funeral, and you talk about not having to write certain things, but each line that you do write for her character in that one only emphasizes what I think is that she's this vapid Hollywood type, essentially.
Right.
Can you talk about creating that character? And then when you cut to you for the reactions of the things that she's saying in the moment, because for us, it's so painful, why is she using this opportunity, this platform to emphasize, like, am I going to get the sequels that I think I deserve kind of thing?
Right. Yeah. So Kaitlyn Dever makes a very small appearance in the movie as an actress who plays the character that my husband had written in a book series. It was really important, I think, for me to show the stark contrast and the discomfort of what actually happens in situations like a funeral or, oftentimes it's wedding speeches, moments that should be really joyful. And then someone comes up and somehow sabotages and you're stuck as an audience member, either, in this case, it was a funeral, having to see a train wreck in real life happening in front of you in the most inopportune time. So humor plays such a crucial part in sadness for me, because sometimes at my lowest, I can only laugh. It was important to have that contrast of a funny dynamic, which, I mean, inherently it's quite uncomfortable, but it allows the audience a little bit of laughter and a little bit of levity in between moments of great like sadness. So we edited that scene, I want to say, for weeks.
No kidding. Really?
Just that moment, because the tone, the contrast, it couldn't be too big. There was much more of Kaitlyn's eulogy that we ended up trimming down. It was about looking at the contrast between the bookends of her eulogy and then David Bradley's eulogy, which really brings us back to earth and to a very real place. Figuring out the subtlety of those reactions when they happened, when we cut to the friends, when we involved the audience, when we stayed on her, whether it's a close-up or a wide shot, how much it was this dance of what was, let's go too far and then let's rein it back. Let's go too less and then let's bring it back. Like it was this constantly ever-changing moment in the movie that eventually we would move past, and then we'd watch the film a couple weeks later in a rough cut and say, okay, let's go back and tweak it a little bit more.
Interesting.
It speaks also to Kaitlyn's talent, because she never made it funny. She came in and really treated that person like a real person, which allowed for the discomfort to force laughter as opposed to the audience being aware that I was actively trying to make them laugh. It's this whole dance ultimately of like tone. And so yeah, it took a long time to get to that sliver of her time in this movie.
It really works.
Yeah.
It really works.
Thanks.
I'm so glad Sean brought that up because Dan, I spoke to you for the television junket a few weeks ago, and one of the things that I brought up to you was that shot at the funeral where you are in focus and Hamesh and Ruth are behind you out of focus, which I found to be a narrative explanation of your isolation and your friends having your back, but you kind of pushing them a little bit out of your life, out of focus. And since you're directing this film, I'm very interested to know about your relationship to the frame and the lens choices and things like that. And I know those are all technical things, and we can get really nerdy and dive into those ideas, which I love that type of filmmaking. But I'm just curious from your perspective, when you design a shot like that, where you are in focus and your friends are out of focus, that does speak narratively to your themes. And I just wonder what your discussions are with your DP about finding how your frame will look and how you will mess with focus. How involved are you in those exact discussions about like knowing the framing?
Yeah, Ula Birkeland, who shot the movie, and I we had to have a ton of conversations about it because the way that I approached the direction versus the acting was that I kind of needed to know in advance how everything would look, so that when we set up the scene and actually shot it, we pre-planned it in advance so that I could just approve the shot. We knew what we were shooting. I would then go in front of the camera, do our first take. I would come back around, screen the take, not for performance really, but more for, did we get the shot? Like, does the shot look the way we need it to look? Give any notes that needed to be given. And then I would go back in front of the camera and stay there and trust Ula to know what we needed to get and to change and to make subtle changes. And he would change the focal length sometimes if we needed to kind of adjust certain things, or he'd come to me with an idea and I would trust him. It had to be that kind of relationship, because if I was going back and forth every time between every take, not only would it lose us so much time, but it also would break my relationship with the actors that I was in the scene with. So yeah, we pre-planned every shot as best we could, with an eye to, it wasn't so much the specificity of how it was going to look, but rather what do we need to feel by way of these scenes. And that's what led to the shots. It was like, okay, here we need, and I would walk him through, we went through, the entire script many, many, many times for just emotional passes. Like in this, I really want to make sure that we know, to what you were saying, that we know the friends are there. And in a way, they almost are acting as like an angel and a devil on his shoulder, as well as these kind of loyal companions. But it still needs to be a moment of isolation. Tracking Mark's willingness to open up to his friends was also a change in the way that we included them in the frames. And when was it handheld and when were we on sticks, and what, all of that had to be done in advance. And your relationship with your DP obviously is like,
everything.
If you didn't, everything.
Yeah.
And it was my first film and I'm still learning. And it required a DP who had such patience and such a passion for the film to help me along. There's a whole world where I could have been with someone who really bullied me through this process.
Sure.
And tried to take advantage of the fact that this was my first time. But it speaks to his creativity and his generosity, and I think his excitement about being a part of someone's first film.
Serving a
it really
vision.
was this it was just a great experience. The times with him sitting down and going through the script, and it was just wonderful. It was just wonderful.
Quick follow up real fast on that, because you said handheld to sticks. And I noticed that, and I find that really interesting when a film can be on sticks the whole time, and then all of a sudden you jolt to like a handheld shot. It's jarring, but in an immersive way. Like how do you decide that? Because that is fascinating to me, because like when you go off the shoulder, there's such a rawness to it. It's almost like unsafe. Like you took the things off the bowling lanes and now you're just bowling. And I just wonder. Like, I've always found that interesting when filmmakers do that.
It had to really. It was completely tied to the emotional like state of the characters or the character that was the priority of the scene. And, you know, I think we used it a lot when later in the movie around the dinner table, and when everything was unraveling and there didn't seem to be any boundaries anymore on what was safe and what wasn't. Like, you know, once they have that hard talk in the apartment in Paris, everything was a little freer and everything was a little more chaotic. So it really came down to, just like, what's the emotional state of this person? And do we want to be in the room with them, or do we want to be observing them?
It's cool. I love stuff like that. I always love stuff like that. Sorry, Sean.
So do I. I mean, that's the great like joy of it all was having access to someone who's such a great DP, you know, and who walked me through the process of all of it. And even in terms of language too, you know, like I did a ton of research and read as many books as I possibly could before getting ready for the movie, but it actually takes conversation to really understand, and it takes someone who's willing to let you in and allow you to not know things. I do feel like that was what made this whole experience so special for me. Was I never once felt like I was in over my head, because everyone around me made me feel like we're going to get through this and it's going to be great.
Well, Dan, I'm genuinely curious, in your next directorial effort, do you want to star in it? It feels like you take on a lot, and you didn't give you the opportunity to just kind of learn on the job as a director. You know, you wore two big hats.
Yeah, well, I had directed like a bunch of episodes of my TV show, which I think is what gave me the confidence to walk into this situation and like assume the responsibility of a director. I really believe any project that comes to me, the first question I ask is like, am I the right person for the job? You know, it's because if I'm not going to show up and do the best job I can and know that I'm right for this situation, then you're taking a job away from someone who deserves it more. So for me, it's always going to be a relationship to the storytelling, you know? But yeah, it's tough. It's tough and grueling.
Well, and I've always kind of laughed at when I've seen certain like cast members on a show direct an episode. They're usually like, so-and-so is going downtown this week, you know, and then they're gone for the episode. And I'm like, oh yeah, because they're helming it. That's why.
Yeah, they're on vacation. No, that was not the case with the show. I mean, I think at this point, I waited four and a half seasons into the show before I started directing, again, because I didn't know enough. I needed to learn. I needed to observe. I needed to talk to our crew. I needed to understand what it was that I was going to do if I was going to direct. And so, you know, at that point, show running a television show is almost a form of direction in and of itself. You know, you have to constantly be aware of how things look and how things are supposed to feel and what a character wants. And so by the time that I took I co-directed the first episode of our show, which was a Christmas episode, again, so that I wouldn't overstep, so that I wouldn't take on more than I needed to. I wanted the experience, but I also wanted to do that with someone at first to kind of ease me into it. But I knew the show. And it was the same experience with this movie. I wrote the screenplay and I knew that anyone else who would direct this movie would ultimately have me like hovering in the background, pacing, questioning everything they were doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, do I think I would put myself in it? Probably in a smaller role next time.
I mean, I don't know. I loved you as the lead in this, man. I don't know.
Yeah.
You might need to be a lead again. You might need to do it again.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
One of the most profound scenes in the film for me was the Monae sequence, because I didn't honestly know that about Monae's life, that he had had all that loss and then painted these masterpieces and then as you're walking through. I guess I'll be a little more vague about this, but this is going to be running post your release. But there's some beautiful paintings at the end of this film of your characters, and I was just curious who did those, and what your involvement was in that process of like, because they're very specific, and we see a lot of characters. We see one of you. I think yours is the last shot. So I'm just trying to remember. I wanted to know like what your process was with that, and like how crazy was that to see your characters in painting form or art form like that? It must have been.
It was
cool.
amazing. Well, there's Arnaud Valois' character in the movie asks a question early on to my character, which is essentially like when he tells him that he stopped painting, because my character was, for those that haven't seen it, is a painter was in the film and stopped after his mother died. And he asks why he stopped painting. And I say, because it was too painful. And he said, well, isn't art just a kind of commemoration of pain? And so art plays a big part of this movie, and that the Monae scene when they're walking through the Monets is another example of art being a kind of commemoration of pain. And I knew that the movie was going to end with Mark returning to his painting. And the very first call that I made when the movie was greenlit, before any casting, before any crew, was to Chris Knight, who is an unbelievable painter out of Canada, who I have long loved. In fact, I own a couple of his works, and I called him out of the blue. We'd never spoken before, but we followed each other on Instagram, and I asked if he would do this. I walked him through the movie and what I wanted from it, and it's funny because he had mentioned to me that a week before I called, he was having a conversation with a friend of his about how much he wanted to do what Francesco Clementi did in Great Expectations, which was to ghost paint someone's work in a film.
Oh my God!
So a week later,
I
was calling him, essentially asking him to do the same thing. He said yes, and the minute he said yes, I knew that the end of the movie was going to work.
Oh my gosh!
It's hard to set a movie around a conclusion that is someone else's paintings when you don't know who's painting those paintings. It's a big risk. But in my mind, when I was writing the script, I was thinking of his work.
Wow.
So I think part of it was, if I could get him, then I knew the end would work. And he fortunately said yes. And we worked very closely in terms of what I wanted those paintings to look and feel like. He has such a singular aesthetic too. He plays with color in these really dynamic ways. And it's just he does portraits better than anyone else. And we figured out the paintings, and we took photos and we sent them to him, and he kind of sent us sketches. And funnily enough, we flew him to London to be in the gallery scene at the end of the movie. So he is the gallery owner. So if you watch the movie back, he is behind the counter as the manager of the gallery.
That's amazing.
That's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's it was a little Easter egg.
Cameo. That's awesome.
He also coached me through the scene when I'm starting to paint again, like the sketching of the projection and then the sketching on top of it. He was there to make sure that what I was doing actually looked real. Because there's nothing worse than, some artist at home watching me badly thinking, well, this person has no idea what they're talking about.
Didn't in Titanic, when DiCaprio's doing the drawing, isn't that James Cameron's hands?
James Cameron's hand.
Yes, it's James Cameron's hands drawing Kate Winslet. When they cut to the close-up, it's probably for that exact reason, because DiCaprio maybe didn't. I don't know if he can't draw. But I thought that was really funny.
I don't know if we had it. Well, I don't know if we had a budget necessarily for someone else's hands.
It's actually James Cameron's hands in Good Grief. Breaking news.
Right. I will get you out of here on this one, and we thank you so much for your time, Dan. But there's a story that I started to read from one of your producers, and we have a lot of filmmakers who listen to the show who love learning about other people's obstacles. And I wanted to hear your side of the story of having to shoot at the French Ferris wheel, the Parisian Ferris wheel, because of the availability of it.
Great scene.
And you having to get what you needed to get in a very brief amount of time in a very public space. I know people will benefit from hearing how you overcame that.
Let me just say this. it's a risk to write a Ferris wheel scene.
Okay.
and expect to shoot it on an actual Ferris wheel in the same way that it's a risk to shoot a scene in the L'Orangerie in Paris, surrounded by Monets.
Right.
I don't know how we were lucky enough to secure these locations because, frankly, if we weren't able to secure those locations, they were really. I would have to go into that script and really rework some things.
Yeah.
So we were very lucky. The Ferris wheel in Paris. The story is they had given us approval. I believe we paid to own the Ferris wheel for a few hours.
To be able to all the seats out. That's pretty cool.
We rented it out for the night so that we could shoot on there and not have to worry about anything.
Yeah.
It's not my place. I don't know anything about the Ferris wheel people, but like
I'm sure they're beautiful.
It was a bit shady, gentlemen. It was a bit shady. I don't even know if we might have actually paid and they just kept the money and then said no. But the night before we were about to shoot this scene on the Ferris wheel, we heard that we can still shoot on the Ferris wheel, but instead of shutting down the Ferris wheel, we would be only given 2 pods side by side, and we would have to shoot while they were also onloading and offloading other tourists.
That's insane.
But how would you get their permit? You have to get everyone's permission, don't you? Like if their faces are on camera.
So you put up signs. It's sort of how it works. You put up signs basically saying like you are now entering a place where cameras are rolling. By entering this space, you will have your face on camera. They're also quite blurred, but the Ferris wheel scene was really tricky because it was all timed to. By the time that the conversation ends, we had to be coming through the gate in order for the bit of us going through again. Yeah. That gag of like, we're going to be stuck on this thing to work.
Yeah. Himesh was not happy about that at all.
Himesh was not happy.
The character.
and so we went 2 days prior and we rehearsed the scene on the Ferris wheel over and over and over again. So we could actually time when does the camera need to start rolling on the trajectory of the Ferris wheel in order to time the scene so that it ends 2 loops and ends with us going through the gate.
Okay.
There was more to that scene that ended up getting trimmed out for time. But in my dream world, I wanted to essentially have the ability to play that scene as a oneer.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Or at least be able to sit on characters for really long periods of time and not have to worry about continuity. Yeah. So part of it was the continuity of knowing that we were shooting Himesh's side and knowing that we were shooting coverage on Ruth and I, and where we were had to line up as we did the scene. So it was this unbelievably intricate rehearsal period. We figured it all out. And then we hear, you're going to have to just wait in line and do it with some random tourist who came from a waffle stand. And so essentially what had to happen was, and this is the fun of filmmaking.
Sure.
We had to send our crew into a pod. They had to set it up. They had to light it. Ulo was there with a black blanket over himself with only a space for the lens. And a hot water bottle on his feet because it was freezing. And essentially we had to time it so that when the pod came through the gate, Ruth, Himesh, and I would get into the pod. Every camera was rolling, lights were up. We would sit down. We would hit the mark on the trajectory of the Ferris wheel where we knew the scene started, and we would start the scene. And it was real. So thrilling. For as crazy and chaotic as the whole experience was, those are the moments where you think this is like fun. This is fun.
Yeah. That's amazing. Oh
so
my God.
Did you do it in a oneer and then just cut it? So you did.
Yeah.
It was the one shot. Wow.
It was all timed. Like if you were to pull the footage apart, every shot was done as a oneer.
That's insane.
You should release the raw of that. I would love to see just the raw of the oner.
Well, there's a whole other story that Ruth tells on that Ferris wheel, which was so painful to cut because she is so extraordinary. And, you know, getting into edit, there's very little editing in this movie, frankly. I really wanted to sit with these actors for as long as I possibly could. I didn't want pace to be something that I was scared about. It was about performance. It was about lingering on people's faces to the point of almost uncomfortable, like discomfort. And, you know, first of all, the camera loves Ruth Nega's face. It's unbelievable. And so any chance I could get to just stay on her and let her do her thing, what she did on that Ferris wheel, aside from what made it in the movie, was just incredible.
Well, Dan, we can't thank you enough for coming on and taking the time to talk with us. I hope we hit you with a few you hadn't heard yet during this press tour.
It was such a thrill to come and do this. It was just such a thrill. So thank you so much for having me.
Great. You are welcome back anytime.
Yeah. I will be back sooner than later, I promise.
Thanks, Dan.
We want to thank our good friends at Netflix and, of course, Dan Levy for joining the show. I sincerely hope that he comes back. And I really do hope to see what he does next as a director. I could see him very easily transitioning out into another genre now that he's sort of got his feet wet, figured out how to maneuver through the difficult process of being a writer director. And he has such interest in, obviously, comedy, of which there's some comedy in Good Grief mixed through, but it is definitely more of an emotional ride with his character exploring some complicated steps that we all have to go through when we lose a loved one, especially around the holidays. The holidays play a very significant part of this. I have heard some people talk about the fact that Good Grief is going to become like an annual Christmas tradition for them. And I get that because Christmas does play a significant part of it. It's not the type of film that I would want to sort of go back and rewatch at Christmas time. But if that's the mood that you're hoping to get, I could see how that could sort of provide this for you. I really just enjoyed that it didn't fall into the voice of him sort of recreating his Schitt's Creek persona. He very clearly has other things to say and do as a storyteller, which is why I'm interested to see where he goes in it. And I thought he put together a great cast. I thought Ruth Negga was fantastic in this film. Himesh Patel was fantastic in this new film. And I particularly wanted to, that's why I'm glad I brought up the roller coaster story for Dan, because it seems like a very simple sequence that you would have to get for the conversations that are being held in the moment and the things that the characters have to get through in the scene. But the way that he shoots it, you could tell he's got a better eye for visuals and for technical aspects than I assumed. And I'm excited to see him explore that aspect a little bit more. So if you haven't seen it yet and you've made it this far, make sure you go over to Netflix, put on Good Grief, check it out. It's a really good film, and I think you'll enjoy it for sure. You're going to want to keep it on CinemaBlend. I had teased a little while ago on social media that we got to sit down with Celine Song, whose amazing film from last year, Past Lives, is getting a lot of awards recognition, ton of nominations, and she was an amazing, amazing conversation. It's tough to talk to her because she'd been doing so many interviews up to this point. Past Lives had its debut at the 2023 Sundance Film Festival and then has been flying on the radar ever since then, with people getting to get her to break down aspects of the film. I do think we got into a couple of different corners of Past Lives that she hadn't discussed yet, and she told us an amazing, amazing story about one of my favorite scenes in the film. So I'm going to leave that for you guys to discover on Friday when the main show drops. Thank you, of course, for joining us on our YouTube channel. If you're here, hit subscribe, turn on your notifications. You'll be the first ones to hear when we drop new content on ReelBlend. In the meantime, subscribe to ReelBlend Premium, get you an ad-free version of the show and a newsletter from me. And just keep it here on ReelBlend for all of your cinematic needs. We always appreciate hearing from you guys. We hope you enjoyed this week's interview, and we look forward to bringing you plenty more great content in 2024.